The scream that tore through the Wyoming wilderness wasn't human. At least, that's what Eli Walker told himself when he first heard it. He'd heard enough death screams in the war to know the difference between a mountain lion and a man dying. But this sound made his blood freeze in ways the battlefield never did. Because this scream belonged to a woman. Eli's file clattered to the ground as he bolted toward the Wind River. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about survival. The peaceful water he'd lived beside for 3 years had transformed into a churning monster, brown and violent, swallowing trees whole. And there, barely visible through the spray and foam, a woman clung to a broken cottonwood branch, her dark hair whipped around her face like black flames. Her dress, torn and soaked, dragged her down with every passing second. But here's what Eli didn't know yet, what nobody knew. This woman had been in that river for almost an hour, and she was still holding on. Most people would have drowned in 10 minutes. Most people would have let go after 20. But Clara Jensen wasn't most people. She'd survived worse than a flooded river. Much worse. And when Eli Walker dove into that freezing water to save her, he had no idea he wasn't just saving her life. He was diving into a conspiracy that would nearly get them both killed. The cold hit Eli like a sledgehammer wrapped in ice. The current yanked him sideways, spinning him like a rag doll. Debris slammed into his ribs, branches, rocks, something that might have been part of a fence. He fought through the pain, his lungs screaming for air, his muscles burning from the effort. When he finally reached the cottonwood, his fingers were so numb he could barely grip the branches. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar of the water. The woman's eyes opened. Green, moss green, but vacant, like she was already halfway to wherever people go when they die. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And that's when Eli saw it. Her leg wasn't just trapped. It was wedged so deep between 2 branches underwater that the bark had started to strip the skin from her ankle. She'd been pinned there, fighting to keep her head above water, for God knows how long. How was she even conscious? Eli sucked in the deepest breath of his life and went under. The underwater world was chaos, brown mud, thrashing branches, the violent pull of current that wanted to drag him downstream and never let go. He groped blindly, his numb fingers finding her ankle, the branches, the impossible knot of wood that held her prisoner. He pulled. Nothing. He repositioned, braced his feet against the trunk, and pulled again with everything he had. Something gave way with a sickening crack. They exploded to the surface together. The woman was completely limp in his arms, a dead weight that the river wanted more than it had ever wanted anything. Eli locked his arm around her chest and started the brutal fight to shore. Every stroke forward, the current pushed them 3 feet sideways. Every breath he took, water tried to flood his lungs. His shoulder burned where he'd torn something pulling her free. His vision blurred from exhaustion and cold. But he'd carried dying men off battlefields before. He'd dragged his wounded captain through enemy fire for half a mile. He'd pulled his own brother from a collapsed trench while bullets tore the air around them. This river wasn't going to beat him. Not today. He hit the muddy bank with the last of his strength and collapsed. The woman lay motionless beside him, water streaming from her mouth and nose. She wasn't breathing. Eli rolled her onto her side and pounded her back. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. His heart hammered against his ribs. Not like this. He hadn't survived the war, hadn't built a life in this godless wilderness, just to fail at saving one woman from drowning. He hit her back again, harder this time. She convulsed. Water exploded from her mouth in a violent gush. She coughed, choked, gasped for air like a person learning to breathe for the first time. Her eyes snapped open, those impossible green eyes, and locked onto his face with an intensity that felt like a physical force. "You're safe," Eli said, his voice rough and breathless. "You're..." She scrambled backward so fast she nearly fell into the river again. Her hands clawed at the mud, her torn dress hanging off one shoulder, her body shaking so violently, Eli thought she might be having some kind of fit. And the look on her face, pure animal terror. Not terror of the river, terror of him. "Don't touch me," she gasped. "Please, please don't. I'll do whatever you want, just don't." "Ma'am, I'm not. I have money." Her voice cracked. "Not much, but it's yours, all of it. Just please don't take me back to town." Eli froze. Those words didn't make any sense. Why would someone who'd just nearly drowned be more afraid of going to town than dying in a river? Why would she offer him money? Why did she look at him like he was the devil himself? What the hell was she running from? "I'm not taking you anywhere except somewhere warm," Eli said slowly, carefully, like he was talking to a spooked horse. "You'll freeze to death out here." "No." She tried to stand. Her legs gave out immediately, and Eli caught her before she face-planted into the mud. She went rigid in his arms, every muscle locked tight, barely breathing. But she didn't fight. She'd learned not to fight. Eli recognized that kind of stillness. He'd seen it on prisoners of war who'd given up hoping for mercy. He carried her to his cabin without another word. And with every step, he wondered what kind of hell this woman had lived through that made her more afraid of human kindness than drowning in a flood. Inside the cabin, Eli set her gently in the chair closest to the fire and turned his back. "Get those wet clothes off before you die of cold," he said, his tone flat and practical. "There's a blanket on the bed." Silence, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. "Ma'am, I'm not looking. I'm not—" He stopped himself. "Just get warm." He heard her move, slowly, painfully. The wet fabric hitting the floor. The scrape of the blanket being pulled from the bed. He busied himself making coffee, adding a generous pour of whiskey to both cups. His hands shook slightly, not from the cold, from something else. Anger, maybe. At whoever had hurt this woman badly enough that she expected every man to be a monster. When he finally turned around, she was wrapped in his spare wool blanket, her wet dress hanging near the fire. Her face was bruised. He hadn't noticed that before. A fresh bruise on her cheek, purple and ugly. Her hands trembled around the coffee cup he handed her. And her eyes, God, her eyes stared into the fire like she could see demons dancing in the flames. "My name is Eli Walker," he said. She didn't respond for a long moment. Then, barely audible, "Clara Jensen." They drank in silence. Eli didn't push. He understood survival. He understood the kind of quiet that comes after trauma. He'd lived in that silence for years after the war. So he let her be. Let her warm herself. Let her decide if she wanted to talk or stay silent forever. Finally, her voice came out thin and fragile. "My husband passed 3 weeks ago." Eli nodded but said nothing. "He left debts, bad ones. Men came for the land, said it belonged to them now." She swallowed hard. "I ran, took my horse and just ran. The river was so high, I didn't see it until too late. My horse threw me and—" Her voice broke. "I thought I was going to die. I wanted to die." That last sentence hit Eli like a fist to the gut. "But you didn't," he said quietly. "No." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You saved me. River would have killed you. Maybe that would have been better." Eli's jaw clenched. "Don't say that. You don't know what I've done, what they'll say I've done." Her hands shook harder. "They'll call me a thief, a liar. They'll—" She stopped abruptly like she'd said too much. The night deepened. Exhaustion finally dragged her under, and Eli laid out his bedroll on the floor. "You take the cot," he said. She looked at him with something between gratitude and disbelief, like she couldn't quite believe a man would give up his bed without expecting payment. She climbed onto the cot slowly, wincing with every movement. Her ankle was badly swollen. Her body was covered in bruises Eli pretended not to see. The fire dimmed. Shadows grew long, and then her voice came from the darkness, so quiet he almost missed it. "Mr. Walker?" "Yeah?" A long pause. Her breathing turned shaky. "Will you stay if I undress?" The words hit him like a cannonball. Not a question, an offer, a transaction, the kind of desperate, broken offer a woman makes when she's learned that her body is the only currency men accept. Eli stared hard at the dying coals, his jaw so tight it hurt. His voice came out low and rough. "No one is bothering you here. Get some sleep." Behind him, he heard a quiet, choked sob. She tried to hide it, but in the small cabin, there was nowhere to hide. Eli lay awake the entire night, staring at the fire, knowing the river had washed more than one kind of storm into his life. What he didn't know yet, what Clara couldn't bring herself to tell him, was that the men who came for her weren't just creditors. They were her dead husband's family. And they weren't looking for land or money. They were looking for something she'd buried, something worth killing for. Morning light crept into the cabin like it was afraid of what it might find. Eli was already up, leaning against the doorframe, watching the river. It had calmed some, but not enough, not nearly enough. He heard Clara wake, the shift in her breathing, the soft rustle of movement, the weight of yesterday settling on her like a lead blanket. When she finally rose from the cot, she moved like every bone in her body hurt. Her limp was worse than last night. Her eyes were red from crying. But she dressed in silence and limped outside without a word. "River's still too high," Eli said. "I see that." She didn't ask when she could leave, didn't ask where she should go. She just started working, pulling weeds from the small garden Eli barely tended, straightening tools, doing anything to keep her hands busy. When Eli told her she didn't need to work, she only said, "It's better than sitting." Days passed like this, slow, heavy. Two strangers sharing a cabin, but not sharing their ghosts. They cooked together, ate together, existed together in a silence that felt like its own kind of language. But Eli watched her more than he admitted. The way she flinched when he moved too quickly. The way she couldn't quite meet his eyes. The way she always positioned herself near exits, like she was ready to run at any second. On the afternoon of the third day, Eli saw them, the scars. Clara was hanging laundry, and her dress shifted, revealing her back. Thin white lines crisscrossed her skin like someone had drawn a map of pain across her body. Whip marks, old ones, some newer. Eli's stomach turned over. He'd seen scars like that before. On prisoners, on slaves, on soldiers who'd been tortured. He turned away quickly, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He said nothing, not yet. But inside, something dark and violent stirred. A rage he'd thought died on the battlefield. Because now he knew. Clara Jensen hadn't just lost her husband. She'd escaped him. That night, everything changed. A rider appeared across the valley. Jed, a hand from the ranch where Eli did occasional work. Clara saw him first. The color drained from her face so fast, Eli thought she might faint. "Who is that?" she whispered. "Just Jed. He's harmless." But Clara didn't look convinced. She backed into the cabin like a rabbit disappearing into its burrow. Jed brought news that made Eli's blood run cold. "There's talk in town," Jed said, shifting uncomfortably in his saddle. "About the widow Jensen." Eli's jaw tightened. "What talk?" "They're saying she ain't no widow, that her husband died in a brawl, and she ran off with money that wasn't hers." Jed wouldn't meet Eli's eyes. "Amos Jensen, her husband's brother. He's in town telling everyone she's a thief. Says she stole from the family. Sheriff seems inclined to believe him. They're fixing to come looking for her." Inside the cabin, Clara stood frozen, her face white as snow. When Jed rode off, she wrapped her arms around herself and started shaking. "He was right," she whispered. "Amos, he hates me. He always did." "Why?" "Because," her voice cracked, "because I know what he did." Eli went very still. "What did he do, Clara?" And that's when she told him the truth. The real truth. Not the sanitized version she'd given him before, but the ugly, brutal reality of her life. Her husband, Silas Jensen, had been a drunk and a gambler. When he lost, which was often, he took it out on her. Beatings. Worse than beatings. Things Clara couldn't bring herself to say out loud even now. She'd saved money in secret. Pennies and dollars scraped together over years, hidden in a coffee tin buried behind the house. "I was pregnant once," she said, her voice hollow. "A boy. He was born too early, too small. He didn't make it." Tears streamed down her face. "Silas blamed me. Said I did it on purpose. Amos blamed me too. Said I wasn't fit to be a Jensen." Eli felt something crack inside his chest. "I wasn't legally married to Silas," Clara continued. "We had a ceremony with a traveling preacher, but Silas never filed the papers. Said it wasn't necessary. So when he died..." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I had no rights, no claim, nothing, just the money I'd saved. And Amos wants it." "Why does he want it so bad?" Eli asked. "Can't be more than... It's not about the money." Clara's eyes met his, and Eli saw something there that chilled him to the bone. "It's about what I saw." "What did you see?" Clara's hands shook as she poured herself more coffee. 3 nights before Silas died, Amos came to the house. He and Silas fought, screaming, shouting, breaking things. I hid in the bedroom, and I heard... She stopped, swallowed hard. "I heard Amos say he'd killed a man, a rancher named Bartlett who'd been found dead 2 weeks earlier. Everyone thought it was bandits, but..." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It was Amos. He killed him over a land dispute, and Silas threatened to tell the law." Eli's mind raced. And then Silas died. In a brawl, or so they said. Clara's laugh was pure bitterness. But Amos was there. Amos was always there. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why Amos wanted Clara silenced. Why he was spreading lies about her being a thief. Why he was using the law to hunt her down. She wasn't just a woman who'd taken money. She was a witness to murder. And witnesses had a way of disappearing in the West. "You can't go back to town," Eli said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "I know." Clara looked at him with those green eyes that had seen too much horror. "But I can't hide here forever. Sooner or later, they'll come. Let them come." The words surprised both of them. Clara stared at Eli like she'd never seen him before. And maybe she hadn't. Maybe she'd only seen the quiet man who saved her from the river. Not the soldier underneath. Not the man who'd killed 7 enemy soldiers in hand-to-hand combat to save his unit. Not the man who'd walked through hell and come out the other side still standing. "You don't understand," Clara said. "Amos has the sheriff. He has the law. What do we have?" Eli's smile was cold and hard. "We have the truth. And if that doesn't work..." He patted the rifle above the fireplace. "We have other options." That night, Clara's fever hit. It came on fast and brutal. Her body's delayed reaction to nearly drowning, to the cold, to days of stress and fear. By midnight, she was burning up, tossing in the cot, whispering things that made no sense. Names of people long dead, apologies for sins she never committed, pleas for mercy from ghosts that would never answer. Eli stayed by her side the entire night. He bathed her forehead with cool water. He made her drink when she could. He spoke to her when she cried out, his voice low and steady, an anchor in her delirium. "You're safe," he said over and over. "You're with me. Nobody's hurting you." Just before dawn, her eyes opened, glassy, fever bright, but seeing him, really seeing him. "You're the only one," she murmured. "The only one who ever touched me without wanting something." The words broke something inside Eli that he didn't know could break. Something he'd thought died in the war. Some part of him he'd buried with his brother and his fiancée and all the other things he'd lost. When dawn came, Clara slept peacefully for the first time. The fever had broken. Eli stepped outside to breathe, to think, to figure out what the hell they were going to do next. The river had calmed. Soon she'd be able to cross. Soon she'd be able to leave. And the thought of her leaving felt like someone was slowly removing his ribs one by one. He heard footsteps behind him. Turned. Clara stood in the doorway, barefoot, wrapped in his old army shirt that hung to her knees, her hair loose and wild, her eyes clear and searching. She walked toward him through the cool morning air, stopped right in front of him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "Eli," she said softly, "can I stay a little longer?" It wasn't the river asking, it was her heart. He couldn't trust his voice. So he just nodded. And that was the moment everything changed. Clara stayed. Days turned into a week turned into 2. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. She cooked and cleaned and tended the garden. He worked the land and fixed fences and chopped wood. Their lives brushed together in small ways that felt enormous. A shared cup of coffee, a quiet smile, accidental touches that sent electricity through both of them. But the past wasn't done with them yet. One hot afternoon, Clara borrowed Eli's horse, Drum, to ride. She wanted to feel the wind again, the freedom she'd lost long before her husband died. Eli watched her go with a tight feeling in his chest, something like hope wrapped in fear. Then he heard it. A scream, the terrified cry of a horse. Eli ran, his heart slammed against his ribs, his legs burned. He found Drum tangled in brush and Clara half buried in the loose dirt of a collapsed ravine. She pushed herself up, shaking, dirt covering her face and arms. "Clara!" He slid down the slope, grabbed her shoulders, his hands running over her arms and back, checking desperately for broken bones. "Are you hurt? Clara, are you—" "I'm all right," she whispered. But Eli wasn't all right. The fear that ripped through him when he heard her scream was worse than anything he'd felt in the war, worse than watching his brother die, worse than finding his fiancée with another man. This was different. This was... Without thinking, he pulled her against him, crushed her to his chest, held her like if he let go, the universe would rip her away forever. Clara melted into him. Her arms circled his waist, her face buried in his shirt. They stood like that, 2 broken people holding each other, as if the world was ending and they were the last 2 humans left alive. When Eli finally lifted her chin, their faces were inches apart. Breaths mixing, hearts pounding. He leaned in, almost kissed her. And then he saw it in her eyes. Not just desire, something deeper, something that made him remember her first night, her desperate offer, the way she'd learned to use her body as currency. He stepped back, the moment shattered like glass. That night, Clara stood before him in the cabin. Her jaw was set, her hands trembled, but her eyes were determined. "You saved me," she said. "You've cared for me, protected me, and I want—" She took a shaky breath. "I want to thank you properly." Eli stared at her, his knife frozen mid-stroke over the piece of wood he'd been whittling. Slowly, painfully, Clara unbuttoned the old army shirt she wore. "Will you stay this time?" she whispered. The shirt slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor. She stood before him in her thin shift, firelight painting her skin gold, her scars faint and silver across her back. But this time was different. Eli could see it. This wasn't fear. This wasn't a transaction. This wasn't a woman who'd learned to trade her body for survival. This was a woman asking to be seen, wanted, chosen. Eli crossed the room in 2 long strides. His hands came up to her face, gentle, trembling. "I want you," he said, his voice raw. "But not because you owe me anything. Not because you think you have to. I want you because—" He stopped, searching for words. "Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because when I look at you, I see someone who survived hell and came out the other side still able to smile. And because when you're not here, this cabin feels empty in a way it never did before." Clara's face crumpled. A tear slid down her cheek, then another. And then she was sobbing into his chest, shaking apart in his arms, the truth spilling out of her in great heaving gasps. Her husband's cruelty, the beatings that left her unconscious. The baby she lost because Silas kicked her in the stomach when he was drunk. The shame she carried like stones in her pockets, weighing her down, drowning her slowly from the inside. When she finished, Eli whispered against her hair, "That doesn't make you less. It makes you braver than any man I ever knew." What happened next wasn't desperate. It wasn't payment. It wasn't pity. It was healing. Slow, tender, and filled with a lifetime of pain finally finding a home. But peace never lasts long in the West. 2 days later, a ranch hand named Tommy arrived with news. Amos Jensen was in town, stirring up trouble. He'd convinced the sheriff that Clara had stolen not just money, but a land deed, a deed that proved ownership of a valuable silver claim. "He's saying she forged it," Tommy said. "Saying she killed her husband for it. Sheriff's putting together a posse. They'll be here in 2 days, maybe 3. The land deed. Clara had never mentioned a land deed. After Tommy left, Eli turned to Clara. "Is it true? Is there a deed?" Clara's face went pale. "Yes." "Did you forge it?" "No." Her voice was barely a whisper. "It was my mother's. She owned that land before she died. When she married my stepfather, he took it. Used it as collateral for gambling debts. But the deed, the original deed, was still in my mother's name. I found it after she died. I've kept it hidden ever since. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because," Clara's voice broke, "because it's worth killing for. There's silver on that land. Enough silver to make a man rich. Amos knows. Silas knew. That's why they kept me around, kept me alive, even though they hated me. They needed me to sign it over. And when I refused, your husband beat you. Until I could barely walk." Clara met his eyes. "And when that didn't work, Amos killed him. Made it look like a brawl. Planned to marry me himself, forced me to sign the deed, and then—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Eli felt his hands curl into fists. "Where's the deed now?" "I buried it, before I ran, under a rock by the Wind River, about 3 miles east of where you found me." "Show me." They rode out at dawn, following the river east. Clara's hands shook as she guided them to the spot, a distinctive red boulder shaped like a crooked finger. She knelt, dug with her bare hands, and pulled out a tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was the deed. Yellowed with age but perfectly legal, signed by Clara's mother 20 years ago. "This is yours," Eli said. "Legally yours. Doesn't matter. Amos has the law. He'll say I forged it. Who's going to believe a woman over a man with money and connections?" Eli stared at the deed, thinking hard. "I know someone, a judge in Cheyenne. He served in my unit during the war. Saved my life once, if anyone can help. Cheyenne is 4 days' ride. Then we better get moving." But they didn't get the chance, because that afternoon, when they returned to the cabin, 3 horses were tied up outside, and one of them belonged to the sheriff. Eli's hand went to his gun. Clara grabbed his arm. "Don't. If you shoot a lawman, they'll hang you." "If I don't, they'll take you." "Then let them take me." "Like hell." The cabin door opened. Sheriff Rawlings stepped out, followed by 2 deputies, and, Eli's stomach sank, Amos Jensen himself. Amos was a big man, thick through the chest, with cold eyes and a cruel smile. "There she is," Amos said, pointing at Clara like she was a criminal. "That's the woman who murdered my brother. That's the thief." "I didn't murder anyone," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear Eli could feel radiating from her. "You ran," Sheriff Rawlings said. "Innocent people don't run." "Innocent people run from guilty people all the time," Eli shot back. The sheriff ignored him. "Mrs. Jensen, you're under arrest for theft and suspicion of murder. You'll need to come with us." "She's not going anywhere." Everyone looked at Eli. His hand rested casually on his gun, but there was nothing casual about the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who'd killed before and would kill again if necessary. "Son, don't make this worse than it needs to be," the sheriff said. "She's innocent. That's for a court to decide." "A court you control," Eli said, looking at Amos. "A court bought and paid for by a murderer." Amos's face went red. "You calling me a murderer?" "I'm calling you exactly what you are. A man who killed his own brother for a piece of paper. A man who beat a woman half to death trying to steal her land. A man who—" Amos lunged. The deputies grabbed him, but he was screaming, "I'll kill you! I'll kill both of you!" There it was. The confession Eli had been baiting him for. But the sheriff's face barely changed. "That's enough," Rawlings said. "Amos, get control of yourself. Walker, step aside, or I'll arrest you too." Eli didn't move. His hand tightened on his gun. For a long moment, nobody breathed. The deputies had their hands on their weapons. Amos was trembling with rage. Clara stood frozen between them all, her face white as death. "Eli," she said softly, "don't die for me. I'm not planning on dying. Please." Something in her voice cut through the rage and the fear and the violence hanging in the air like smoke. Eli looked at her, really looked at her, and saw what she was trying to tell him. They couldn't win this fight, not here, not now, not against the law, corrupt as it was. Slowly, Eli raised his hands, stepped aside. The deputies moved in, put iron shackles on Clara's wrists. She didn't fight, didn't cry, just held Eli's gaze as they led her to the horses. "I'll get you out," Eli said. "I promise." Amos laughed. "She'll hang before you can do a damn thing, cowboy." They rode off, dust rising behind them, Clara's dark hair disappearing down the trail. And Eli Walker stood in front of his cabin, rage and helplessness warring inside him, knowing he had maybe 2 days before Clara Jensen died at the end of a rope. He waited exactly 30 seconds after they disappeared. Then he saddled Drum, grabbed his rifle, and rode like the devil himself was chasing him. Because he was about to do something monumentally stupid, something illegal, something that would make him an outlaw for the rest of his life. He was going to break Clara out of jail. But first, he needed help, and he knew exactly where to find it. Eli rode hard for the cattle ranch where he worked, a place called the Rocking J, owned by a woman named Jane Cartwright. Jane was tough as railroad spikes and twice as sharp. More importantly, she hated Amos Jensen with a passion that bordered on legendary. He found her in the stable, examining a lame horse. "Eli Walker," she said without looking up. "You look like hell." "Need your help, Jane." "Figured. Heard about the Jensen woman. Also heard you've been hiding her." "She's innocent." "Don't care if she's innocent or guilty. Amos Jensen is a snake, And anything that makes him miserable makes me happy. Jane straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. What do you need? A distraction. Tomorrow night. Something big enough to pull the deputies away from the jail. Jane's eyes gleamed. I can do that. What else? A fast horse, supplies for a long ride, and your word you won't tell anyone what I'm planning. Where are you taking her? Cheyenne. I've got a contact there, a judge who owes me. Jane studied him for a long moment. You're risking everything for this woman. I know. You love her. The question caught Eli off guard. Did he love Clara? He'd known her barely 3 weeks. She'd been a stranger drowning in a river. But somewhere between saving her life and watching her smile for the first time, between holding her while she cried and learning the map of scars on her back, between whispered conversations by firelight and the way she said his name. Yeah, Eli said. I do. Jane grinned. About damn time you fell for someone. I'll have everything ready. You just make sure you don't get yourself killed. The next night, all hell broke loose in the town of Lander, Wyoming. Jane Cartwright's distraction turned out to be a stampede. 30 head of cattle suddenly broke loose from their pen and went charging down Main Street, smashing through storefronts, knocking over wagons, causing absolute chaos. The 2 deputies guarding the jail ran out to help, leaving just Sheriff Rawlings inside. Eli slipped through the back door while Rawlings was distracted at the front window, watching the mayhem. The jail cells were in the back room, 3 of them, all empty, except for the one holding Clara. She sat on the small cot, her hands still shackled, her face gaunt from not eating. When she saw Eli, her eyes widened. What are you doing? She whispered. Getting you out. Eli pulled out a small iron file and started working on the lock. They'll kill you for this. Only if they catch me. Eli, this is insane. The lock clicked open. Eli pulled the cell door wide. You can stay here and hang, or you can come with me and live. Your choice. Clara stared at him. Then she grabbed his hand and ran. They made it out the back door and into the alley where Drum waited with a second horse, a gray mare Jane had provided. They swung into the saddles and spurred the horses east, toward Cheyenne, toward freedom, toward a judge who Eli prayed would listen. Behind them, Sheriff Rawlings's shout of rage echoed through the night. They rode through darkness, through forests and across rivers, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. By dawn, they'd put 30 miles between themselves and Lander. But Eli knew it wouldn't be enough. Rawlings would form a posse. He'd track them, and he'd bring Amos Jensen with him. We need to rest the horses, Clara said. Can't. Not yet. Eli, they'll die if we don't. She was right. They found a small clearing near a stream and dismounted. The horses drank greedily, while Eli kept watch, his rifle across his knees. Thank you, Clara said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We've got 3 days of hard riding ahead of us, and a posse on our tail. Still, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. Eli looked at her. You were right, that night by the fire. I do care about you, more than I should, more than makes sense. But I'm not letting you hang for something you didn't do. Clara's eyes filled with tears. What if we don't make it? We'll make it. How can you be sure? Because, Eli's jaw set. Because I've walked through worse. Because I've survived things that should have killed me a dozen times over. And I'll be damned if I survive a war just to lose you to a corrupt lawman and a murdering bastard. They rode for 3 days straight, stopping only when they absolutely had to. The landscape changed around them, mountains giving way to high plains, pine forests thinning out into grasslands. And always, pressing at their backs, the knowledge that the posse was coming. On the 3rd day, they saw it, A line of riders on the horizon. How many? Clara asked, her voice tight. Eli counted. 6, maybe 7. Can we outrun them? No, the horses are too tired. Eli looked around frantically. They were in open terrain, nowhere to hide, nowhere to make a stand. Then he saw it, an abandoned homestead about a mile east, half collapsed but with stone walls that might provide cover. There, he said, pointing. They raced for the homestead, reached it just as the posse crested the ridge behind them. Eli dismounted, grabbed his rifle and all the ammunition he had, about 30 rounds. Not nearly enough if it came to a real fight. Clara had a pistol Jane had given her. 6 shots. Can you use that? Eli asked. I've never fired a gun in my life. Guess you're about to learn. The posse surrounded the homestead. Sheriff Rawlings called out, Walker, you're only making this worse. Send the woman out, and I'll let you ride away. Go to hell, Rawlings. You've got 1 minute to decide. Eli looked at Clara. She looked back at him. And in that moment, they both knew. This was it. The end of the line. They could surrender and hope for mercy that wouldn't come. Or they could fight and die together. I'm not giving up, Clara said. Neither am I. Eli raised his rifle and fired the first shot. The gunfight that followed was brief and brutal. Eli's first shot took down 1 deputy. His second missed. Return fire exploded from the posse, bullets slamming into the stone walls, kicking up dust, shattering what remained of the homestead's windows. Eli fired again. Another deputy went down, clutching his shoulder. Walker! It was Amos's voice now. You're dead. You hear me? You're a dead man. Come get me, murderer, Amos charged. Eli shot him in the leg, and he went down screaming. But the distraction cost Eli. One of the other deputies rushed the doorway. Eli swung his rifle around, too slow, and the deputy's knife plunged toward his ribs. Clara's pistol barked. The deputy stumbled, blood blooming on his shirt, and collapsed. Eli stared at Clara. She stared back, the gun shaking in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. I told you I'd never fired a gun, she said weakly. You're a natural. But they were down to maybe 15 rounds between them, and the posse still had 4 men standing. It was only a matter of time before they rushed the homestead together. And when they did, Eli and Clara would die. Then, impossibly, a new voice rang out across the plains. Hold your fire! Eli risked a glance out the window. A group of riders approached from the east, at least 10 of them, wearing badges. U.S. Marshals. And leading them was a man Eli recognized, Marshal Thomas Brennan. Eli had saved his life during the war, dragged him out of a burning building while enemy soldiers closed in. Tom, Eli called out. Eli Walker, you stubborn son of a bitch. Tom rode closer, grinning. Heard you went outlaw. Thought I'd come see for myself. I'm not an outlaw. You broke a prisoner out of jail, shot 2 deputies, and started a war in the middle of nowhere. That's pretty damn outlaw. She's innocent. I know. Eli blinked. You know, we've been investigating Amos Jensen for months. Murder, fraud, witness intimidation. We just couldn't prove anything. Until now. Tom jerked his thumb at Amos, who was still on the ground, clutching his bleeding leg and swearing. He just confessed to killing his brother in front of 6 witnesses. That confession, plus the testimony from your lady friend there about what she heard, plus the forged papers we found in Amos's house yesterday, it's enough to hang him. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Eli leaned against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted. You're saying Clara's free? Free as a bird. But you, Walker... Tom's grin faded. You shot 2 deputies. That's a problem. They deserved it. Maybe, but the law's the law. I can't just let it slide. Clara stepped forward. Those deputies were corrupt. They were working for Amos. They knew he was guilty, and they helped him anyway. Tom studied her. You willing to testify to that under oath? Yes. Then we might have a way out of this mess. Tom dismounted, walked over to Sheriff Rawlings, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground, and said something Eli couldn't hear. Rawlings's face went from red to white. He nodded once, mounted his horse, and rode away without a word. What did you say to him? Eli asked. Told him if he fights this, I'll investigate every arrest he's made in the past 5 years. He decided retirement sounds pretty good right about now. Tom looked at Eli and Clara. You two want to tell me how a cowboy and a supposed murderess ended up in a shootout in the middle of nowhere? So they did. They told him everything. The river rescue, the scars on Clara's back, the silver deed, Amos's threats, the escape from jail. All of it. When they finished, Tom was quiet for a long moment. You love her? He finally asked Eli. Yeah. And you? Tom looked at Clara. You love him? Clara's eyes found Eli's. Yes. Tom shook his head, but he was smiling. You two are the craziest, luckiest people I've ever met. All right, here's what's going to happen. You're both coming to Cheyenne with me. We're going to straighten this mess out legal-like. Clara's going to get her land deed recognized. Amos is going to hang for murder. And Eli, he pointed at Eli, you're going to owe me for the rest of your life. Deal. They arrived in Cheyenne 2 days later. The trial was swift. Clara testified about everything she'd seen and heard. The U.S. Marshals presented evidence of Amos's crimes, not just the murder of his brother, but 2 other killings, plus fraud, theft, and intimidation. The judge, a stern older man with no patience for corruption, convicted Amos Jensen and sentenced him to hang. Clara was cleared of all charges. The silver deed was authenticated and legally transferred to her name. She was now the owner of a valuable silver claim worth enough money to set her up for life. But she didn't want the silver. She sold the claim to a mining company for enough money to buy a small ranch. A ranch with a view of the Wind River. And when the judge asked her if she had any questions, Clara stood up and said, Actually, Your Honor, I do have one question. Yes, Mrs. Jensen. It's Miss Jensen now. Or, she looked at Eli. I was hoping it might be Mrs. Walker soon. The courtroom went silent. Every eye turned to Eli, who sat in the front row looking like he'd been hit by lightning. Clara walked over to him, knelt down so they were eye to eye. Eli Walker, she said softly. You saved my life. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You protected me when everyone else wanted me dead, and you believed me when nobody else did. Her voice wavered. I know I'm not much. I'm scarred and broken and... Stop. Eli's hands came up to cup her face. You're everything. Then marry me. The entire courtroom held its breath. Yes, Eli said. And then, louder, yes. They were married 3 days later under the cottonwood tree by the Wind River, the same tree that had trapped Clara when the river tried to take her life. Now it became the place where she and Eli started their new one together. Marshal Tom Brennan officiated. Jane Cartwright came all the way from Lander to attend. A handful of ranch hands Eli had worked with over the years showed up, bringing whiskey and well wishes. It wasn't a fancy wedding. Clara wore a simple blue dress Jane had bought her. Eli wore his cleanest shirt and a nervous smile. But when he slipped a simple gold ring onto Clara's finger, a ring he'd traded his rifle for, because he'd rather face the world unarmed than not give her a ring, she cried. I never thought I'd be happy, she whispered as they stood together, the river rushing beside them, the mountains watching over them. Neither did I, Eli said. They built a home on a rise overlooking the valley. A real home, not just a cabin, with 2 rooms and a porch, where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the peaks gold. They bought cattle, planted a real garden, made plans for the future that felt impossibly bright after so much darkness. The ghosts didn't leave them completely. Some nights, Eli still woke from nightmares of the war, and Clara would hold him until the shaking stopped. Some days, Clara would see a stranger riding toward their ranch and freeze with fear until she recognized them. The scars on her back never faded. The memories of his dead brother never left. But they carried those ghosts together, and somehow that made them bearable. One evening, about 6 months after the wedding, they were riding along the river. The sun melted into gold behind the peaks. The air was cool and clean. Clara slipped her hand into Eli's as they rode side by side. "Eli," she said softly. "Yeah? Will you stay now?" He looked at her, this woman who'd survived hell, who'd trusted him when trust was the hardest thing in the world, who'd chosen him despite everything. And he smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara smiled back, and for the first time in both their lives, they believed it. They were home, they were safe, they were loved, they were free. If you enjoyed this story of survival, courage, and finding love in the most unexpected places, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you thought, and share this video with anyone who loves a good Western romance. There are more stories like this one coming, and you won't want to miss them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.